vaccination of pregnant ladies first. Some lady is pregnant and she's saying, "Oh, somebody told me my baby will be, have some abnormalities in it." What are the chances, or what do you think a pregnant woman can or cannot take the vaccine?
For pregnant women, even that they were not really part of the clinical studies, so we don't have concrete evidence, for what can happen. But we know that, in case of pregnant women, especially if their healthcare provider or personnel, the chance of getting infected is high. And plus, once they get infected, it could be very severe and can affect the baby. So if you kind of weigh the benefits and the risk, they really need to talk to their doctor and figure that with their doctor. But I believe the recommendation now is, especially for the healthcare personnel, is to go ahead and take the vaccine. But again, discuss this with your own, doctor to just weigh the risk versus the benefits.
Again, I hope nobody bother if I may add a little bit. I was in a talk with Dr. Laura Riley. She's the chairwoman of OB department at Cornell University, and she basically said she will vaccinate all her pregnant ladies because unfortunately, if they should develop COVID, there is much worse complications than the vaccine itself could make, mainly preterm birth. So it looks like all the medical field is going to vaccinate pregnant ladies because they get vaccination for other things. Nardeen, can you explain the topic of herd immunity and how does it tie to mass vaccination?
So herd immunity, basically, as the name indicates, is when the majority of the population, namely about 70%, they say depends on the virus, about 50 to 80%, is immune to that kind of infection. That's when most people, whether it's a natural immunity or whether it's a medicine or vaccine-induced immunity. That's why with vaccinations, it was very important, just like the smallpox, as we mentioned earlier, when the majority of the population got it and when about 70% at least received it, then the incidence of the infection reduced dramatically. And we see this a lot with measles, for example. When everyone was vaccinated with measles, it was almost eradicated. Then areas that don't vaccinate and, because of different beliefs, they start having measles outbreaks. So that's why mass vaccinations is important to receive that herd immunity. Now, just on that topic, if I may, I know a lot of people, especially the younger age group, just felt, why do I bother with a vaccine? Let me just get the disease. It's easier. It's a joke. I'll be fine. I'll be immune and I don't have to worry about it. And the reason this is a very wrong way of thinking is for the following. Just as like Dr. Hany mentioned earlier, the age groups is younger and younger. And honestly, in our ICUs, it's half elderly, half young people, unfortunately. So some younger patients can get very, very sick. So you really don't want to risk that. The other thing, even if you have a mild illness and you think, let's just develop herd immunity that way, you're risking a lot of the older population and the parents and the sicker and the immunosuppressed and others who may get it very severe. And like Veronica mentioned earlier, we don't even know how long this antibody lasts for. So that's why in this case, a herd immunity through vaccination will probably be way more effective than just a natural herd immunity, which we cannot afford with the hospitals too, having so many people sick.
Thank you. By the way, anecdotally, Sweden was one of the countries that believed so much in April in herd immunity. Then they came in June and they said we were wrong. A lot of our youth who we throw them into herd immunity parties or celebrations so they infect each other ended up by much worse infection, and some of them had to be on ventilators. So this is not something we advocate. Veronica, I want to ask a question and add to it something that just came from a good friend of mine. Can the vaccine cause a flare-up of other diseases like autoimmune diseases? And then that, my friend, has polio from before, since he was a child. And one leg is weak and the other leg is normal. He is worried now. Can I get the vaccine and get flare-up of polio?
So first, again, our data is very limited. So the answer that I can give is that one, why autoimmune diseases occur or flare up is a very complex question, and genetics as well as environment plays a role. We know that the vaccine does mediate the immune system. It can cause fever, fatigue, chills as side effects, and some of those are also seen in flares of autoimmune disease. How the vaccine affects the immune system has not been, readily tested on this vaccine. Again, we only have 2 months of data, and immunocompromised individuals were not included in the trials. We do know that other vaccines such as flu, shingles, pneumonia shots are all, so maybe not shingles because that's live actually, but the new shingles, not the old ones, so the Shingrix, are all recommended for those with autoimmune disease because the benefits often outweigh the risks. And those with autoimmune disease can have more severe infections and problems if they get sick. And that is true also for COVID. So like with all other vaccines, it's a discussion with your healthcare provider and looking at the risks and benefits of your particular situation. In terms of polio, again, we don't have anything to look back at and say, that we have any data to support the answer. So I cannot say mechanistically, it wouldn't really make sense for it to cause a flare of polio virus, because again, it's an mRNA to a just one protein in the COVID virus, coronavirus. And so, it's different. However, I cannot say for sure at this point.
Any of the other colleagues want to weigh in this question? Okay, the next question is for Dr. Cecile, and I can't tell you how much misinformation and vagueness is happening here. For whatever it's worth, maybe that's what it is, but do we know how long, or do we have long-term adverse effects from the vaccine or long-term immunity from the vaccine?
Well, for long-term adverse effects, we didn't do long-term clinical studies yet. So we really cannot say for sure that there are no long-term adverse effects. However, from other vaccines, we know that usually vaccines don't cause any long-term adverse effects. And remember again that it's a messenger RNA vaccine, and therefore the chance of this vaccine causing long-term adverse effects is very negligible, if
Okay, thank you.
For the, I guess there is a second part to your question, the long-term immunity. This question, I guess, actually was answered before, but just to reiterate, we don't again have data about long-term immunity. The longest we have is that we have neutralizing antibodies for like 3 months after the vaccine. But that's all we know. We don't really know if it's going to give us a long-term immunity or not.
Thank you. Nardeen, are vaccines actually needed? If we have a proper hygiene, hand washing, masks, distancing, why don't we stay like that without needing a vaccine?
Yeah, so I guess we hope that that was going to be the case after the last wave in April, and things kind of got better in summer for a little bit briefly until the second wave hit, and it hit really hard. So I know some arguments that I was reading were people kind of against the vaccines too, which I understand their concerns, but the argument was maybe they're needed more in areas with poor hygiene or underdeveloped areas. But actually, COVID proved us all wrong. I mean, despite the hygiene, despite how well developed and how much medications we have, yes, we do have antivirals this round. We did not the first round. We do have some treatment modalities we didn't have before, but we still not really able to defeat it without trying to prevent it. I mean, we still have, a fairly high mortality.
Thank you. Dr. Cecile, vaccination usually years to occur and to be implemented in the market. This
Can you say it
vaccine,
one more time? Can you start again, please?
I was trying to state that the history of vaccinations in general takes years for the vaccine to be designed, implemented, and used in the market. This vaccine, for lack of better terms, was really rushed. How can we trust it?
Well, to start with, I respectfully disagree, but it was not really rushed. The CDC actually told us that this vaccine, really went through very rigorous safety and efficacy standards, just like any other vaccine. And the FDA actually will not at all give a emergency use authorization unless the vaccine would actually meet these standards. So it was not rushed. What happened is that the efficiency of the process of emergency use vaccination authorization was actually just improved. But you know that the government, of course, give like startup funds to the companies to develop the vaccine and to actually start the clinical trials right away. And they also give them funds to basically manufacture millions of doses of the vaccine while they're doing the clinical studies. And the idea was this will save time. So by the time, when the time comes to actually receive the emergency use authorization, you'll have the vaccines right away, ready to give to the people. And this actually happened. It's amazing. Just like almost the next morning, the vaccine started to be distributed. So that was really good. And actually the number of volunteers in the clinical studies was quite high. Because it's a pandemic, everybody, was really ready to be part of this clinical study just to get, the vaccines approved. So I don't think it was really rushed. It's just a combination of all these factors that caused, and it's really, I believe you said that it's really a miracle that we have this vaccine in less than a year from start to finish. The sequence of the virus was, determined in January. Here we are. We have already the vaccine, distributed. So
I want to, again, I hope the director of FDA, he's a radiation oncologist, Steve Haas, and I'm quoting him now, he said, "We did not cut any corners." They had a major monitoring body of scientists that were looking at the experiments. The experiments were not done by Pfizer or by Moderna, or for AstraZeneca's case as well. They were done by scientists in certain hospitals. There was no overseeing by the pharmaceutical company, and then they were monitored and audited by the FDA. So although it looks like rushed, there were no cutting corners.